Hello guys, welcome back to another Android Studio tutorial. Today we are going to learn about how to perform the Sqlite read and write operation using a separate background thread. So we know that the database operation may be a long running process. So if you place the database read or write operation on the main UI thread, it will cause your application to pause for some seconds. So if your application is paused for 10 seconds, the Android system may issue an application not responding dialog box. So this will affect the overall user experience of your application. So if your application have a database, you have to perform the database operation on a separate UI thread. So here I am going to create an Android application that demonstrates how to write information to the Sqlite database using a background thread, and after that we read the information from the Sqlite database using another background thread and display that information on a recycler view. So for this application, first here I am going to fetch information from a remote server, and then we are going to write that information to the Sqlite database. So here I am going to use the local host as the web server. Here I am going to use the WAMP server application. So go to the home page of WAMP server. Enter PHP myadmin. Here we have a database called contacts.db. That database contains a table called contacts. So this table contains two columns, ID and name. So here some informations are available on this table. So now we are going to fetch this information to the Android application. For that we need some scripts in server side. So go to the installation folder of WAMP server. Here we have a folder called test app. In that folder we have a PHP script called getContacts.php. So here we fetch all the information from the table and return that information in the form of a JSON object. So here we perform the JSON encode and return that using the echo function. So before going to use this PHP script with our Android app, we can test it. So this is the response from the local host. So here it is a JSON array that contain a number of JSON objects. So here each JSON object has two property, ID and name. So this is our database part. Now we can start with a new Android Studio project. Okay, we can start with a new Android Studio project. Start a new Android Studio project. And give your application name. Select an MD activity. Okay, here the project is created. So first here I am going to add the needed dependency for the application. So for this application we have to use the RecyclerView and we have to fetch information from the local host. So for fetch information from a remote server, here I am going to use Volley. So we have to add dependency for using RecyclerView and Volley. So open module level credit script file. So first here I am going to add the dependency for using RecyclerView. Now we need to add the dependency for using Volley. Okay, now sync the project. Okay, now we add all the needed dependency for this application. So on the main UI, we need two buttons. First button for fetch information from the remote server, and second button for display that information on a recycler view. So here I add two buttons to the activity main.xml. So here the first button for fetch information from the remote server, and second button for display that information on a recycler view. So this is the layout file. Here is the first button with onClick method download contacts, and for the second button the onClick method is display contacts. Okay, now we need to define these two methods inside main activity.java. And for this method we need one parameter. It is a view argument. To display the list, we have to create another activity. So here I am going to start another activity. It is an empty activity with activity class name display contact. So when user click the display contact button, we have to start the newly created activity. So first we have to download the information from the remote server, and we have to save that information to the Sqlite database. So here I'm going to download the information from the remote server using volley, and we have to prepare the database. So now we can set up the database. So first we have to define a contract class for the database. Here I'm going to define some constants. First specify the database name. Okay, here I specify all the needed constants variable. Here is the database name, and here is our table name. Our table name is contact info. So in that table we need two columns. First one is ID and second one is name. So here for our table, ID is the primary key and it is auto increment, so that's why here I am not specify that one. And the second column name is name. Okay, now to create the database and table we need another Java class. So create another class with the class name db helper. And this class extends Sqlite open helper. And here you need to implement some methods. You need to implement two methods, on create and on upgrade. Here also we need some variables. Okay, here I define all the needed variable. First one is database version, and second one is the create table query. Create table, get the table name from the contract class. Here the first column is ID. It is primary key and it is auto increment. Second one is name. So here this is the SQL query for create that table, and this is the SQL query for drop table if exists, and get the table name from the contract class. So for this class we need a constructor, and this constructor need one parameter is a context variable. Okay, now we can perform the database insertion. So we can use the Sqlite database object. So database dot insert. First parameter is the table name. Now second parameter is null column hug, so we can pass null for it. And the last parameter is the content values. So here we perform the database insertion. So here we can display some logcat message. One row inserted. Okay, now we need another method for read information from the Sqlite database. And for this method we need one parameter. It is an object of Sqlite database. So first we have to specify the name of the columns. So here I create a string array. Name it as projections. And here specify the column names. First column is ID and second column is name. Now by using the database object we can call a method called query. So the first parameter is the table name. Second parameter is the projections. Now you need to pass 5 null values. Now we need to return this information from the method. So here we have to change the return type of this method into cursor. And finally we can return the result from this method. Okay, so we successfully create the database table and we save information to the table, and finally we create a method for read information from the table. Okay, now we need to read information from the remote server. So here I'm going to use volley for read information from the web server. And for using volley, here I'm going to use the singleton pattern. So for the volley singleton pattern, we need another Java class. Okay, here I created all the needed methods for using Wooly singleton pattern. Here is a method that return an instance of this class, and here is a method that return a request queue, and here is the method for add each request to the request queue. So this is the Wooly singleton pattern class. So now we have to create a separate layout file for each item on the recycler view. So on the recycler view, we have to display the ID and name. So here I am going to create a separate layout file for each item on the recycler view with the file name row item. Okay, here I add two text view for display ID and the name. For this layout, the root element is a linear layout. This is the text view for display the ID with ID txt ID, and this is the text view for display the contact name with ID txt name. So this layout represents each item on the recycler view. Now open activity main.xml. So if the user click the download contacts button, we have to fetch information from the remote server, and we have to save that information to the Sqlite database. So go to main activity.java. So when user click the download button, this method will invoke. So here we have to read the information from the remote server. So here I'm going to use Wooly for download information from the remote server. So here we can perform a string request. So before going to fetch information from the remote server, we have to add the internet permission inside Android manifest.xml. Now here we can start a string request, Wooly string request. Before going to perform the string request, here we need one parameter. Server URL. Okay, here I specify the server URL. On the local host, we have a folder called desktop, and this is our PHP script name. And here I use the IP 10.0.2.2. So here we are going to test this application on an Android virtual device. So this is the default IP address used by every Android virtual device to access the local host. Okay, now we can perform the string request. The first method is the request type, request method type. Here it is a post request. Now specify the URL. Now specify the response listener. Now specify the error listener. And finally add this string request to the request queue. Main activity.this, add it to request queue and pass the string request. Okay, now we can handle the response. So here the response is a string array. Sorry, here response is a JSON array. I name it as JSON array and pass the response. And here we have to add some try catch block. And here we need some variables. Specify the variable value into 0. Now create another variable called name. Now start a loop while count less than JSON array dot length. Now we have to retrieve each of the JSON object from the JSON array. So create a variable JSON object. So JSON array dot get the JSON object and pass the variable count. Now we need to put each of this information to the Sqlite database. So for that, here we have to create some variables for the database. So first one is db helper, new db helper, and pass the context. Now we need another variable for Sqlite database. So db helper dot get writable database. Now here we can retrieve the name. So JSON object dot get string and pass the key for it. Here the key is name. Now we can pass this information to the Sqlite database. So db helper dot save it to local database. First parameter is name and second parameter is the Sqlite database variable. And finally we update the variable count by 1. So from this while loop, we retrieve each of the JSON object from the JSON array, and we get the property name from each of the JSON array and save that information to the Sqlite database. So after perform the write operation, we can close the database. And here we can display a toast message. Contacts downloaded successfully. So here we perform the database write operation, and here we perform the database write operation inside the onResponse method of the volley string request. So here we use the volley to fetch information from the database. So volley uses a separate background thread for its operation. So the onResponse method will execute inside a separate background thread. So there is no need to worry about this, because here we perform the database write operation on a separate background thread. Okay, now we can retrieve that information from the Sqlite database and display that information on a recycler view. For that, we need another Java class with the class name contact. So this is a bean class. So here we have to define some method. We need getter and setter method for these two variables. Now we need a constructor for this class. And for this constructor, we need two parameters. And call the setter method from this constructor. Okay, now we need a separate class for the RecyclerView adapter. So create another Java class with the class name RecyclerAdapter. And this class extends adapter. And here you need to implement some methods. First, here I am going to add the view holder class. And this class extends view holder. And here it needs a constructor. And here I'm going to define some text views, ID and name. Now initialize these two text view variables from the constructor. First one is ID. Typecast that one into text view and use the parameter item view. Now find it. It is txt ID. Now initialize the second text view variable. It is name. And the ID is txt name. Okay, now specify the generic type for the class. It is an object of the singleton class. Here it is my singleton. And for the first parameter, here the return type is an object of the singleton class. And for this method, the first parameter is an object of the singleton class. Sorry, it is a view holder, my view holder. Okay, and here I'm going to create some array list that contains some object of the contact class. And from the getItemCount method, return the length of the array list. And here we need a constructor. And for the constructor, we need one parameter. It is an array list. And initialize the array list from the constructor. Now inside the onCreateViewHolder method, create some variables for view class. Layout inflator from parent.getContext and inflate r.layout row item parent, and one more parameter, it is a boolean. And finally we have to return an object of the viewHolder class from this method. Return new my viewHolder and pass the view variable as a parameter. Now go to the onBindViewHolder method. Here we can set the data on the text views. So holder dot First we can set the name. Get the object from the array list and pass the position and call the getter method. .setText. So here the ID is an integer on the database, so we have to convert that one into string values. So integer dot toString context dot and pass the position get ID. Okay, this is the adapter for the recycler view. So now we have to read the information from the Sqlite database and display that information on the recycler view. So go to activity display conduct. So here we need to add a recycler view. Also, to perform the fetch operation, we have to add some progress bar. Okay, here I add all the needed view components inside the activity display contact.xml. Here I place a progress bar and align it to the center, and here I make it invisible by using the attribute visibility into gone. And here the ID of the progress bar is progress bar, and here is the recycler view with ID recycler view. Okay, now open display conduct, and here we have to define some method, some variables. First one is progress bar, and second one is an object of recycler view. Now we need some layout manager for the recycler view. Now we can initialize these variables. First initialize the progress bar, typecast that one into progress bar. Now find it, progress bar. Okay, this is progress bar. Now initialize the recycler view. First typecast that one into recycler view. Now find it. Now initialize the layout manager. Okay, now set the layout manager for the recycler view. Set has fixed size into true. Okay, now we need to read information from the Sqlite database. So the read operation may be a lengthy process, so we have to place the read operation in a separate thread. So here I am going to using an AsyncTask to perform the database read operation. I name it as background task. And this class extends AsyncTask. Specify the generic type for the AsyncTask. We need 3 generic type. So for convenience, here I am going to pass void for the 3 generic type. And here you need to implement some methods. You need to implement one method do in background. We need some other AsyncTask lifecycle methods. We need the on pre-execute method. Now we need the on progress update, and final one is on post execute. So here we need some variables. First one is some variables for RecyclerView. Second one is some variables for the progress bar. And now we need some context variable. It's not context. And now we need some variables for the recycler adapter. It is a recycler adapter. I name it as adapter. Now we need a constructor for this class, and for the constructor we need 3 parameters. First one is a RecyclerView. Second one is a progress bar, and last one is a context variable. Now we can initialize these variables from the constructor. Progress bar. Now initialize the context. Now from the onPre-execute method we can set up the variables for the background operation. So the onPre-execute is also in the main UI thread. The doInBackground method execute on a separate background thread. OnProgress update on the main UI thread, and onPostExecute also work on the UI thread. So only this method, doInBackground method, execute on a separate background thread. So we can initialize the adapter from here. Also we need one more variable here. It is an array list. That contains some object of contact class. Now initialize the adapter from here. New recycler adapter, and pass the array list. Here the array list is contacts. And set the adapter for the RecyclerView. Here it is adapter, and we can set the visibility of the progress bar into visible. Okay, now we can perform the database fetch operation. So go to the doInBackground method. So here we can perform the database read operation. So first create the needed variable for the read operation. And pass the context. Now create some variables for Sqlite database. Get a readable database. Now here declare some variables, ID, now we can read the information from the database, so we need some cursor variable. Read from local database and pass the Sqlite database object. Now we can fetch each of the row from the cursor. For that, start a while loop. Move it to next. Fetch each of the information. First ID. So cursor dot get int, cursor dot get column index, and specify the column name. And second one is name cursor.getString, cursor.getColumnIndex, now create an object of the contact class and publish that object from the doInBackground method. So here the progress is an object of the contact class, so we have to update the generic type of the class. Here it is contact. And for the onProgressUpdate method, the parameter is an object of the contact class. So here we can publish that one, publish progress, new contacts. First one is ID, second one is name. So to make it a long running process, to mimic this one as a long running process, here I am going to sleep the thread for some milliseconds. I'm going to sleep it for 500 milliseconds. And after that we can close the database. First we can close the cursor. Now we can close the database. So from the onProgressUpdate method, here we have the parameter is an object of the contact class. So now we can update the adapter. So contacts dot add values of 0th index. Now we can call a method called the notify data set change on the adapter. This will update the UI. Inside the onPostExecute method, we have to hide the progress bar. So progress bar dot set visibility into gone. Okay, now go to main activity. So when user click the display contact button, we already start the second activity. Now go to display contact.java. Here we have to override one more lifecycle method on resume method. From the on resume, we can call the background task. So new background task. And for this you have to pass three parameters. First one is the RecyclerView. Second one is the progress bar, and final one is the context. And finally call the execute method. Okay, now we finished the coding of the application. Now we can test it. So run the application. Okay, now the application available on this virtual device. So here is our database. So first we have to download information from the remote server. So download contacts. So here it shows contact downloaded successfully. So we can check the Android Studio. So here is the logcat. It shows some data is successfully inserted to the Sqlite database. Okay, now we can display it on a recycler view. So click the button display contact, and here is the progress bar, and you can see while the background process is still running, you can interact with the UI. So here the UI thread is not pausing. So this is how we read and write information on a Sqlite database using a separate background thread. I hope you understand all these concepts. Please subscribe my channel for getting more Android tutorial updates. Thank you for watching. See you in the next episode.